YouTube, you're now watching Gunplay TV, and today on the channel we are going to be taking a look at two of the big boy P320s from the boys at SIG Sauer. We've got the all-new AXG PRO, and we're going to be comparing that to the current flagship, the P320 Legion. Alright, and so if you're not already subscribed to the channel, of course I'd ask that you pause this video now, scroll down, take a look for that subscribe button, and once you've found it, go ahead and give that a click for me. I do appreciate it. And without further ado, let's get straight into the video.
Reach for the sky.
Alright guys, so as we said in the intro, we've got two of the top contenders as far as P320s go here on the table. Alright, so here on the left, of course, we've got the AXG PRO. That's an all-new model for 2021. And then here on the right, we've got the P320 Legion. Okay, and so this is essentially SIG Sauer's flagship model. It's got all the bells and whistles, and we're going to be comparing the two today. All right, so hopefully at the end of this you'll have an idea of which pistol is best for you. Now, of course, aside from appearance, these guns will bring some different features to the table, and so the point of this video, of course, is to kind of highlight those, the pros and cons of both, and of course allow you to make a decision as to which pistol is going to be best for you. All right, and so we're going to rattle through a few categories, starting off with features. Alright guys, so let's kick it off with features and we'll go left to right on this, alright? And so before I go any further, I will say that both of these models are going to be pretty well equipped when it comes to features, and frankly with this AXG PRO, we've probably touched on a few of them in the previous AXG First Look video. If you haven't seen that, I will put a card up at the top of the video. But the main call to fame, at least with this P320, the AXG PRO, is going to be the AXG grip, okay? And that's going to be the Alloy X Series grip frame. And essentially what that is, of course, it's a standard P320 grip with the exception that it's all metal this time, all right? And so SIG Sauer claims that this is made of stainless steel, okay? And so you get a more traditional SIG Sauer feel with this particular model, all right? And so with that all metal frame, right, you do get additional weight. That's a feature in and of itself, and we'll kind of circle back to weight here in a later category. You're going to get a flat face trigger. Of course, you do have the option and the ability to mount Picatinny devices, whether that be a Surefire X300 or otherwise, okay? And then in addition to that, this is the AXG PRO variant, okay? And so what that signifies, of course, is the fact that you're going to get that P320 Pro slide there up top, okay? And so we see that we've got lightened cuts there on both the sides and the top, and of course that's just going to help the slide to move a bit faster back in the battery, hopefully lending itself to performance, all right? Okay, and so on the surface, that's more or less what you get. We will kind of dive into these features more in depth here in a moment, but moving on to the XFive Legion, all right? And so first thing I'll say, we can see that this one's a bit modified, right? We've got a SIG Romeo up top. My buddy's actually got some grip tape installed on here, and so as I usually do in these comparison videos, we are going to tackle this as if it is a stock firearm, okay? So for all intents and purposes, this grip and optic will not be considered during this video. Aside from that, this pistol is more or less stock, okay? All of that out the way, what do you get in the way of features with the XFive Legion? Well, first thing that you get is going to be this kind of Legion gray coloring, okay? And we can see right off the bat, it is a bit lighter in color than the AXG PRO that we have here on the table. In addition to that, you are going to get a full-size frame. We can see that we've got a few more rails of Picatinny section here on the XFive Legion, right? You're also going to get the skeletonized flat trigger. But of course, I would say that the biggest features or call to fame with this particular XFive Legion model is going to be, well, two things, right? The first of which, of course, is going to be this TXG grip frame, okay? And so just like we have here on the left, we have an AXG grip, of course, Alloy X Series grip. This is going to be the TXG grip, right? Tungsten infused X Carry grip, okay? So basically what they've done here, they got a polymer frame as opposed to the all metal, but they've infused it with tungsten. And if you don't know, tungsten is a very, very dense metal. And all that really means is for a certain amount of tungsten, it's gonna weigh quite a bit more than say the same amount of steel or of course aluminum, right? And so what that means is, in addition to having just more weight in general, that should help you to mitigate some of that recoil when you are trying to get follow-up shots, right? And so I think if I can say so myself, I believe that the XFive is probably SIG Sauer's entry into competition. Now, in addition to that, right, I mentioned that there was a second feature. That's gonna be primarily, at least in my opinion, it's gonna be this bull barrel. And we'll take a second look at these barrels here later in the video, but essentially you get a beefier barrel on your Legion, okay? So that of course means more weight, and we'll touch on what that means for performance out of the pistol here in a bit. Now, moving on to the next category, we're going to touch on sights, okay? And so as we went through features, I imagine a few of you were thinking, hey, you completely left out the fact that they have different types of sights. They're both optic ready, right? And we're gonna get ready to get into that. Now, of course, again, going left to right, on the AXG PRO, we've got the SIG Sauer X-Ray 3 day-night sights, okay? And so these, of course, are gonna be tritium, and you've got kind of a high visibility polymer surround on that front sight, a very bright green, and then you've got a black surround on the rear tritium inserts, okay? And so very simple in the way of a sighting system. Not the fanciest irons, but certainly better than what you get out of the box with quite a few other SIG Sauer pistols or pistols from other manufacturers for that matter, right? Typically you're gonna get the standard 3-dot, not so much with these kind of advanced higher end P320s, okay? All right, so taking a look at the Legion here, we'll notice right off the bat that we've got a slightly different sighting arrangement, right? And of course, omitting the red dot here, you are going to get a fiber optic front sight, okay? And so as opposed to the tritium insert that we've got on the AXG Pro, you've got fiber optic up front. Again, kind of lending itself to competition. This is going to be very good when you're outdoors, but of course not so great when you are stuck inside in the dark, right? So a bit of a trade-off there. Now, one other thing to note when it comes to sights on these two models, at least in my opinion, I think that the P320, the AXG Pro here on the left, is a bit more well equipped, right? Now it is a later model, it's come out more recently, but what we'll notice here on this XFive Legion when compared to the AXG Pro here on the left is, well, once you drop in a red dot, you pretty much don't have a rear sight. Now, in this case, this particular Romeo red dot does have an integrated rear sight. And of course, that's gonna be helpful because on the Legion, right, this is the key difference that I was kind of alluding to here a moment ago, that rear sight is fixed to the optic plate, okay? And so if you ever at any point decide to remove that optic plate to place an optic on like we see here, you will lose your rear sight, okay? Now in comparison, we'll notice while there is no optic on this AXG Pro, we can see that that plate is completely separate from the dovetail for your rear sights, which means you can drop in an optic and keep your rear sights, of course, or change them to maybe suppressor height to kind of fit that optic, right? So an important call out between the two there. Now, of course, they both are going to be optic ready, and of course, they're going to be first party optic ready primarily, right? So both of these are going to support the SIG Sauer Romeo optics. In addition to that, I believe SIG Sauer kind of is working hand in hand with Leopold and making sure that those optics also fit on these optic cut footprints, okay? And so those are kind of your three out of the box options. Trijicon and Holosun are there, but there's some nuance there with the screw sizing and thread pitch. We won't get into that, but that's sights in a nutshell. So moving on to yet another category, slide release. Now this is one that I think people might often overlook or maybe not evaluate when they're picking up a new pistol, but for me, and especially for these particular guns, right, they are full size, I imagine that the target demographic for these particular models is gonna be kind of the competition space. And in that realm, it might be nice to kind of have something of a beefier slide release, slide catch, okay? And so we'll take a look at this AXG Pro first. And I'll go ahead and just call out, these are a bit more pronounced than the standard P320. Actually, I have one of those here, and I'll kind of bring that out for comparison. Now, here's my standard P320, okay? And I don't know if this will show up on camera, but these slide releases don't quite peek out as far as they do on these two models, okay? And so one thing that you're getting off the bat is something of a extended slide release. Of course, not the same as a third-party option, but both of these are going to be pretty accessible. As far as I can tell, the two of them are the exact same slide release and they are both extended, okay? And so that's a win in my opinion. Now, not a super beefy, big slide release like we saw on the Walther PDP, but just the same, very effective and very familiar. If you ever shot a P320, you're gonna feel right at home. Now, of course, both of those slide releases are gonna be ambidextrous, very ergonomic, and I can actuate that from both sides without any issue, okay? And so that's the case, of course, on that XFive Legion as well. So always nice to have ambi controls, something that you don't find on every firearm, but these P320s, as I said, right, have pretty much left nothing off the table. All right, so now on to what I would say is probably one of the more pronounced differences between the two pistols, ergonomics and grip. Okay, so this is one of my favorite categories to go through because, of course, this is a handgun, and so you're gonna be holding it and gripping it, of course, in your hand, okay? So ergonomics and grip are going to play a role in how the gun shoots and how you shoot the gun, okay? And so right off the bat, right, this AXG grip frame is a bit, well, I won't even say a bit, it's significantly different than most of the X-Carry frames, most of the P320 frames to date. Now, I say that not in the sense that it's incompatible with other models, but in the sense that the way that it feels your hand is quite a bit different. And we'll go ahead and kind of compare the two here right off the bat. Aside from the fact that this XFive here on the left is using a tungsten infused grip, which we'll get into here in a bit, essentially it is the same shape and sculpting of a standard P320 X carry frame. So one of the first things that I noticed, of course, was kind of the difference in the way that they sculpted that beaver tail. I'm very much more used to the XFive kind of grip frame style. Again, much to my point, pretty much identical to what's on my other XFive grip frame here, right? So for me, coming from this SIG Sauer P320, right, the standard model, I was very much used to this particular grip. Now, I did say that the grip on the AXG is quite a bit different, and that's primarily due to just A, the fact that it's made of a different material, and B, again, it kind of shares a different profile if we kind of hold those side by side. In addition to that, one of the things that you're getting with this AXG frame are these Hogue G10 grips. Now, G10, as we know, it's a very nice material, often used on firearm grips, and frankly, it adds a very nice stylistic element to this piece, but at the same time, right, it is very functional. Now, again, evaluating these pistols as they come out of the box, I have to give the edge to the AXG Pro. Those G10 grips are quite nice right out the box, and again, they are removable, as I touched on in my previous review, so maybe down the line we'll see some different options there. Now, the tungsten infused grip that comes on the XFive Legion, a bit different. We've already mentioned, right, we do have some added grip tape that we're gonna ignore for this video, but as far as grip right out the box, not quite as good as this, at least in my opinion. Now, we can even see that my standard P320, I had stipple. Now, that's something that you can always do, but of course, not something that's typically included stock, so we'll kind of overlook that. But by and large, I would say that if you are familiar with the P320 line, you're going to be able to pick any of these up, and they do point quite naturally, okay? And so if you do have that muscle memory from your basic P320, you're not gonna have trouble transitioning between either of these models. Now, ergonomics and grip is kind of a nice segue into this next category, which is going to be size and weight, okay? And so both of these, as we mentioned before, are gonna be full-size pistols. All right, now the difference, of course, being this P320 here on the right, the XFive Legion, it does sport a 5-inch bull barrel as opposed to the 4.7-inch kind of standard P320 barrel that we have on the AXG Pro. In addition to that, right, we touched on this very early on in the feature section, they each are kind of comprised of different materials aside from, of course, the fact that both of the slides are going to be stainless steel. We've got a stainless steel frame here, and we've got a tungsten infused polymer frame here on the XFive Legion. Okay, and so what that's going to mean is you're going to get a difference in weight, right? The hand feel, if you will, is a bit different between the two. This one does feel quite a bit lighter after you pick up the XFive Legion, but when you're coming from kind of a standard P320, you're gonna notice the added weight from that stainless steel frame. Now, before I break out the scale, I will also point out they are both utilizing mag wells, okay? So that's gonna be something that you can add or remove, but of course, that's going to add an element of weight. Now, as we're kind of peeking into the mag well of the P320 AXG Pro here, I'm not sure if this will show up on camera. I'll see if I can maybe roll in some B-roll. But what I'm seeing inside of that grip frame essentially is all polymer with a large piece of metal, tungsten, of course, here in kind of the back strap of that grip frame, right? So inside of your mag well, right against where the back of your magazine is riding, seems to be a large piece of tungsten. And frankly, as I hold this particular model in my hand, it does feel like most of the weight is concentrated in the back. Now, before getting this in hand, I was kind of curious how in the world SIG was able to mix plastic or polymer with a metal like tungsten, and it doesn't look like they're actually infused, but more or less connected or kind of dovetailed together here into the mag well, right? All right, guys, so we've got the scale out, right? We've got all the talking out the way. Let's go ahead and see what these come in at. So we'll start with the XFive Legion, right? This is gonna be the heavier model. It's coming in at 40.8 ounces, right? And so if you know anything about firearms, that's no slouch, especially considering the fact that this has a polymer frame, despite the fact that it's got a giant piece of tungsten there in the back. Now, moving on to the AXG Pro. Again, it's gonna be a bit lighter than that XFive Legion was, but still quite a bit heavier than your typical P320. And we can see here, this is coming in at just under 32 ounces at 31.7. Okay, and so just for comparison's sake, right, I do have my standard P320 here. Of course, this is kind of the carry length, right? Not as much barrel or slide material on this particular model, but we will weigh that in just for the hell of it. And we can see that the standard comes in around 26.3 ounces. So a significant bump between either the AXG or the XFive Legion. Either way, you're getting quite a bit more weight with those firearms. Now, before we move off the topic of weight, I think it's something that's important to discuss because, again, as I said before, I imagine both of these pistols are kind of aimed at the competition shooter, okay? And so, especially this XFive Legion, that additional weight is gonna mean that that recoil is, especially with these being 9mm, is going to be significantly less than with a polymer framed firearm of the same size. And so typically, of course, the more weight that you can get, the more recoil that you can absorb. Same thing with this AXG Pro, heavier than your standard polymer P320. And so if you're looking at something based upon that P320 platform and you're looking at competing, I think that you'd be well served with either of these, frankly. But again, that's gonna come down largely to personal preference, feel in hand, and of course, right, aesthetics. All right, so with size and weight out of the way, I'm gonna touch on takedown. Now, of course, I'm gonna do this particular portion of the video off camera and we'll revisit once we've got those guns broken down. But essentially, as we know, it's going to be the exact same process between pretty much all P320s, right? And that's one of the nice things about these particular firearms. They're very modular. And if you buy a second one like we have here on the table, the takedown procedure is going to be pretty much identical.
A few moments later.
All right, guys, so now that we've got each of the pistols broken down, we can kind of see right off the bat some of the similarities, but of course some of the differences. Again, ignoring this Nipsey Hussle grip tape that we've got on the Legion. Right off the bat, we can see that the recoil system on the Legion is a bit different. It's actually been upgraded and is now using a solid steel guide rod, and is actually going to include a 1911 style spring that we can see here, right? As opposed to the captured guide rod and spring assembly on the AXG Pro. Now, in addition to that, with the XFive Legion, you are also going to get an additional 1911 style spring. So it's going to come with a 12-pound and a 14-pound spring out of the box with the XFive Legion. Now, one other noteworthy addition that you're going to get with that XFive Legion is going to be the bull barrel. The idea is that you're going to get better heat absorption, right? There's going to be more material there, and that's naturally going to absorb more of the heat. Now, firearms, as their barrels heat up, they inherently are going to lose a slight amount of accuracy. And so again, these bull barrels are going to be very popular amongst competition shooters, again, for that reason. Now, in addition to that, naturally, there's more material there that's going to better absorb the vibrations, and you're going to get better harmonics, ideally, out of a bull barrel. Now, on the other hand, again, we've got more or less a standard P320 barrel on the AXG Pro. That's not to say that that's a knock against the AXG Pro in any form. The P320 barrels are very good, and of course you do have third-party options out there, but it is important to note the XFive Legion barrel will not fit with other P320 models. Reason being, now this XFive Legion, one, that barrel is quite a bit bigger. As we've already touched, right, the bull barrel's got a bit more material on it, but we'll also note that it's larger in diameter than the hole in the slide itself. So that's not going to be compatible, again, with any slide other than the XFive Legion slide. So let that say what it will. Now I've got them both up right here, and we can see down into the FCUs, the fire control units themselves, and they're gonna be more or less the standard P320 style fire control unit. They're gonna be largely the same. There may have been a few tweaks that were made to the XFive Legion, but as far as I can tell, these FCUs are more or less identical. Now, as far as differences between the two, now that they're broken open, there are a few that remain, some more glaring than others. And frankly, we've touched on these at least to some degree up until this point. The first of which, of course, is going to be the frames themselves. Now, as I alluded to previously, we'll notice right off the bat that the AXG Pro here on the left has a bit shorter of a frame. Now, the AXG Pro frame here on the left is actually a carry size frame as opposed to a full size frame that you get with that TXG grip with the XFive Legion. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and kind of juxtapose these, kind of sit this on top here so you get an idea of the difference in frame size. And of course, I'll make sure that I put some of those specs up on the screen, but by and large, you are going to get a larger frame on that XFive Legion. Now, before I throw these back together and we talk about the last difference, of course, right, the triggers, I do want to point out with that XFive Legion, right, hopefully we can see that here, you do have a large weight, tungsten weight within that grip there, okay? And so that's going to, of course, increase the weight of the firearm. Now, SIG is claiming that this is a first in the industry, and according to them, it can reduce your muzzle flip by up to 50%. Now, I imagine that's going to be largely contingent upon your grip and the shooter themselves, but let that say what it will. All right, so we got both of the pistols pieced together again, and I think before we go any further, it's important to take a moment to focus on the triggers, right? So we'll notice right off the bat, both of these triggers are flat-faced. The AXG Pro here on the left is going to be using the standard XFive flat-face trigger, whereas we kind of get this skeletonized version of the XFive trigger here on the right. Now, SIG Sauer claims that the XFive Legion has a trigger pull that's up to 30% lighter. Now, they say up to 30% lighter, so I imagine that it's going to vary a bit depending on which model you're comparing it to. Maybe when compared again to the standard SIG, it's going to be quite a bit better, but we'll go ahead and ghost these triggers together. So unfortunately here on the channel today, I do not have a scientific means, at least, of capturing the trigger pull weight data. Okay, and so you'll have to kind of take my word for it, and I'll put what I'm able to find on the internet as far as the pull weights up on the screen. Now, what I will say before I go any further is if you're only here for the triggers, the XFive Legion definitely takes the cake when compared to the AXG Pro. So if that's all you wanted to know, you can stop the video now. The XFive Legion definitely edges out the AXG Pro. Now, it's not by much. All right, so we'll do our best to go ahead and ghost these triggers here on camera for you. As I feel the take up on these, I would say that the XFive Legion feels a bit slicker, but it is an older pistol. It's had a lot more rounds down range as opposed to this very new AXG Pro here on the right now. Okay, and so what I'm gonna do is kind of take those up to the wall, and I'll try to break these as evenly as possible. And so this is again kind of the experience that I've had. The XFive Legion breaks a bit earlier, a bit easier than the AXG Pro. Not by much. Again, for an experienced shooter or a newer shooter, you're probably not going to notice it at all. However, if you are a competitor, I think that you will find that this one has an edge. Now, again, P320s are very modular. You can always swap the trigger. In fact, I've got a video coming up where I'm going to be putting a Gray Guns competition trigger in that AXG Pro, so stick around for that. But by and large, as far as triggers go, this one both looks better and is a bit smoother than the AXG Pro. All right, we're gonna kind of bring it home with some of the more important categories, if you will. Now, I say important because in my mind, I imagine both of these pistols aren't necessarily marketed or aimed at the first-time buyer. Now, if you're looking at these, I imagine you're either a competitor, a collector, or one way or another, it's not your first sidearm, okay? And so we're gonna be talking about look and price. Now, I imagine these pistols with all their bells and whistles aren't necessarily marketed at the first-time buyer. Of course, they could be, but I imagine that the target market is in one way or another collectors, competitors, or at least second-time buyers, right? And so with that being said, right, again, with all those bells and whistles, I think the looks are going to be important when you're making a decision between the two of these, right? Now, off the bat, we can see that there's quite a few differences. Of course, with the XFive Legion here on the right, you're gonna get that signature SIG Sauer Legion gray finish. You either like it or you don't. So for me personally, I'm not a huge fan of the Legion gray. I know that's gonna probably upset a few people. That's not to say it looks bad, it's just not to my taste. Now, I am a fan of the 226 Legion, so maybe for me it's just model specific. But all that being said, I think that the AXG Pro here with the Pro Cut slide really just looks quite a bit better. Now, you do get some cuts on the XFive Legion here on the right, but to me, I think that the Pro slide is quite a bit more tasteful. At least in my opinion, by and large, the styling on the AXG Pro is quite a bit more modern and at the same time, more classic, if that makes sense. At least for me, those Hogue G10 grips kind of give it a more 1911 classic style look, and when paired with that Pro Cut slide, it really does come together. Now, myself, I was initially a bit upset that that frame was not a full length, but it's kind of grown on me, right? Having this little bit exposed at the front, I think again kind of gives it that 1911 style classic look, and I'm a fan. Now, the XFive Legion, on the other hand, while it's the SIG Sauer flagship, does look quite a bit bland, and maybe that's why my buddy went out and got this colorful grip tape. Again, not to my taste, but I think that this gun is more aimed at performance, right? Most of the changes that SIG Sauer's made with the XFive Legion are on the inside, and they are notable upgrades. All that being said, we've got to talk about price, and I'll talk about street price. I'll put the MSRPs up on the screen. As of summer 2021, there's quite a price gap between the two of these, right? Now, I said before that the XFive Legion is the SIG Sauer flagship, if you will, for each of their models, right? So whether that's a 226 or the 320, the Legion kind of has all of the quirks and features. Now, on the other hand, the AXG Pro here is relatively new to the market, not intended to dethrone the flagship model here on the right, but it's coming in here at $1,200 US. Now, that's quite a stark comparison considering that here on the right, The XFive Legion is the flagship, and you can get these around $899, right around $900, between $900 and $1,000, I'd say, right? So there's quite a gap between the two. Maybe not a pronounced gap if you're looking at either of these pistols. Now, initially, I would have said that, that's probably attributed to the difference in price of the grip frame. But if anything, as I mentioned, there's more bells and whistles here on the XFive Legion, including that new trigger. You've got the upgraded guide rod and recoil spring assembly, and you've got a bull barrel on the XFive Legion. So frankly, I don't know how to justify the price difference, but the AXG Pro is quite a bit more expensive. So if you are budget conscious, go ahead and pick up that XFive Legion. Now I've got to wrap it up with the cliche YouTuber, if you can only have one comparison, right? For me, I'm going to keep it short. If I can only have one, I'm going with the AXG Pro here on the left. I personally like the all metal construction. It feels very classic, very reliable, and very robust in your hands. That's not to knock the XFive Legion over here. Again, it's got some great features on the inside, but if I can only have one, they've both got legendary SIG Sauer reliability, at least in my mind. So with that out the way, and accuracy largely being contingent on the shooter's skill, I think that for me it comes down to style, and you really can't beat that AXG Pro. Now, of course, if you feel that you disagree with me on any of the points that I made, feel free to go down in the comments and tell me where I'm wrong. If you like the Legion more, tell me where I fucked up, and let me know between the two of these pistols which one you'd like to have by your bedside. All right, guys, and that's gonna more or less wrap it up for our comparison between the AXG Pro and the XFive Legion. Thank you again for watching Gunplay TV. Please make sure if you haven't already that you hit that subscribe button as well as the like button, and go ahead and leave a comment for the algorithm as well. And now that you've done that, I'm gonna go ahead and get up out of here. I'm gone.